Hello and welcome. You're watching The Watchdog. My name is Liesl Wilson. I'm standing for my colleague Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight.
Inherited a mess.
While the state of the South African health system has come under the spotlight in the last couple of days. A report released by the country's health ombudsman has painted a grim picture of Rahima Moosa, Mother and Child Hospital, and he is my first guest tonight. While South Africa's higher education sector is again faced with what seems to be a recurring issue around funding and student accommodation, Higher Education Deputy Minister Buti Manamela is one of my guests tonight. And ahead of her appearance at the Pretoria High Court tomorrow, we end the show with a reflection on day 2 of suspended Public Protector Mkhwebane's testimony at her impeachment hearing. On that note, the Watchdog begins now. While we start things off by taking a look at the Health Ombudsman, Professor Mkhwebane, which was recommended, in fact, that disciplinary proceedings be initiated against the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital, CEO Dr. Mkhwebane. Of course, this follows Mkhwebane's investigation into allegations that expectant mothers at the hospital, which is Coronationville, Johannesburg, sleep on the hospital floor. Now, the CEO was not working full-time at the hospital for 182 of those days. It seems that this is just one of the findings of the report into the hospital. Professor Mkhwebane joins me via Zoom to discuss the report in detail, and also to discuss the state of the country's health system at large. Prof, good evening, and thank you for your time here on The Watchdog.
Good evening, Madam, and good evening to the listeners of your program. And thanks for the opportunity.
Prof, it's obviously, shone a spotlight on the state of the healthcare system. And I think perhaps as we hone in on what happened at the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital, before we look at the healthcare at a national level, perhaps we could speak to the report that was released, the state of the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital, which arguably has sent shockwaves through society. Perhaps we could backtrack a little bit. How did we get here? When we're looking at the issues of infrastructure, procurement procedures, the conduct of the CEO at large, just paint that picture for us.
Well, it was on the 6th of April that we received a complaint from a member of the Portfolio Committee on Health, I think is Honorable Ismail, bringing our attention to 3 issues. The fact that there was a complaint that pregnant mothers at Rahima Moosa Child Hospital were sleeping on the floor, and that in 2021, the CEO of the hospital had spent 182 days, and this had been, I think, discussed in the Gauteng legislature. The complaint had been brought by Jack Bloom of the DA, and the respondent was the former MEC, Dr. Mkhwebane. And then the third complaint that was brought to us was that the dignity of patients at the hospital, particularly in the obstetric unit, was really being undermined. And that's how the complaint was structured to us. And we went through a number of issues, interviews. We collected data from the hospital, from various people. We interviewed 34 people across the hospital, including people in the provincial health department, the HOD, head of corporate affairs in the in the Gauteng Department of Health, and we interviewed the former MEC, and then we interviewed the CEO on several occasions, I think 2 or so, and we interviewed, as I say, several other people senior enough that know, I think, the hospital pretty well. And then we recorded everything and looked at the literature, did comparative analysis, and we confirmed that I think all those 3 complaints that were lodged were substantiated by evidence that could stand the test of any court anywhere in the world. So that's the situation that was at the Rahima Moosa Hospital.
Prof, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sorry,
okay.
do continue.
No, I was saying that clearly there were other findings, obviously, as part of these investigations that were more horrifying than the original complaints. For example, the infrastructure, there's no heating. Pregnant mothers were complaining that they can't go to the toilets there because they don't work, and there was sewage seeping all over the place. There were even potholes that you could find in some of the places in the hospital, and you ask yourself, I mean, what kind of place is this? And just the entrance to the hospital was not really encouraging. It's almost like we're entering a place where thugs live rather than a hospital.
Prof, I asked you to paint that picture because one is to also look at the systemic issues, perhaps also how long it's taken, for us to arrive at this point upon your findings. I was reading about when you presented your findings that the hospital was founded 80 years ago, built in 1943. One is to also question, the issues of resourcing and budget.
That's correct.
Resourcing and budget. So, yes, upon, the CEO coming to the fore and perhaps taking the reins and not really delivering on her mandate, I wonder how far back these issues stem. How did we only begin to find this out now?
Well, look, I think if you really want me to put into perspective, I mean, Dr. Mkhwebane has only been in this hospital for 2 years.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about here is something that obviously has been simmering and has been developing over years. And so I think we have to put that into context to understand, I think, the magnitude of the challenge that she faced. When I had an interview with her, I mean, she, in her own words, said this was the most challenging job that she has ever had. It was highly stressful for her, and she didn't receive any support, despite, I think, recording the challenges that she was facing to headquarters. So there was a litany of issues that she had to deal with. But at the end of the day, she is the person at whose door the buck stops. So, it's been happening for years, but now she is in charge, and obviously she needs to translate some of these challenges into meaningful solutions that can assist, I think, an institution such as Rahima to be the institution that it used to be. I think, as I indicated, this used to be the jewel in the crown in maternal health and maternal studies in the country. And most of us, when we were young doctors, we wanted to come to Rahima Moosa Hospital. In fact, there is a story that I was requested to come and head the Department of Medicine at Rahima Moosa Hospital many years ago when I was still abroad. So there are all kinds of things like that this was really a very important hospital, highly specialized in obstetric issues, in pediatric issues, or neonatal issues, and really a very special place to be.
Thank you for those sentiments, Prof. I think perhaps before we continue with the conversation, I also wanted to look at how health activists, as well as members of civil society, say that they're not surprised by the recent report on the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital, as the conditions of hospitals stated in the report have been likened to that for a while now. You know, this is obviously, they're saying, can be found, the state of that hospital can be found in other parts of the country as well. Perhaps on the back of that, here's what 3 activists had to say about the state of hospitals in the country, with a focus on the Rahima Moosa Hospital, before we continue our conversation.
I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised of the findings, because these are the very same findings that we find in 2021 when we were doing our hospital monitoring in Gauteng, and that led us to sleep in the cold 2 nights at the offices of the Premier of Gauteng, then David Makura. And what all the things that are coming up in this report, these are the things we've been complaining about. These are the things that we've been identifying in our public healthcare system. You know, women sleeping on the floor, that is not an issue of Charlotte Macleay or of Rahima Moosa only, but it's open, it's happening in almost every hospital around the country, especially in Gauteng. I can tell you about what is happening in Sebokeng Hospital, where there are a lot of cases of obstructive violence that are happening there, at Charlotte Macleay, at Mkhwebane, actually all the hospitals around Gauteng. I can confirm that that is a situation. If you remember, Vuyo, we also raised a similar case in Tembisa Hospital few years ago, before we had COVID-19. I think, if I'm not mistaken, around 2018, where we're raising same concerns of women sleeping on the floor, and others, they were giving birth on the floor, others, they've lost their children. So the issue of the healthcare system, it's a long-standing crisis, but now, because the health ombudsman it's involved, maybe we will see some improvement in terms of the political will. But so far, I'm not surprised, because all the things that have been written there, we've been talking about them, but unfortunately nobody listened to us.
I think sometimes well-intentioned policies ended up crowding out the things that we needed to do. And I think I'm more shocked that even with COVID being the kind of pandemic that affected everyone, when we look at the data around COVID, we had a very unequal response, despite everything that the government spent and invested in. And I think for me, this should be a turning point in our system, where we actually stop and draw a line and figure out what is the kind of health system we need, right? And what is the one that we can actually deliver? And really start looking at ways and means that we can optimize our collective effort and start seeing an improvement. Let's not 5 years from now also reflect back on the Rahima Moosa report, and rather see this as a touchstone to start building a more equitable healthcare system, because there are pockets of excellence. Right? I don't think that this is a position in every single hospital around the country. I think there are some rural hospitals where if I still had if we were still of childbearing age, we would deliver our baby there. But then there are also other places where I wouldn't let anybody go to. Right? And I think it's really just a matter of us stop just oiling the wheel that makes the most noise and start talking about how do we fix the system. Right? Because I don't think we can have another decade of talking about a failing health system and not doing anything.
I think it's a mistake to keep talking about political will. We need to go back to basics, where all of us have lost our humanity. And that's where the problem lies. You know, I was sad to hear the Ombud say that he wouldn't let any of his relatives go to that hospital. But he would only go there if he was unconscious. And I asked myself, we have a 6-week-old grandson in the family that was born there. So the things that I have on the report, I've seen myself. And I ask myself, what type of grandfather am I to let my nephew and his new wife have their child there? And all I can say is that our ancestors have not forsaken us. And that's why we have a grandson. And that's a sad, sad state of affairs.
Prof. Mkhwebane, let me bring you back into the conversation. Just also recap some of the sentiments from the activists. We heard One saying that there was no surprises, a lack of political will. Also questioning, how do we begin to fix this? How do we go back to basics, restore human dignity? Upon the recommendations, skill requirements, standards of CEOs, in terms of the standards employed, what's on the cards at this point? How do we begin to fix this?
Well, I've seen the activists that have spoken, and I know all of them, and I think they have more experience of the situation than I do have. But I do think that one of the problems that we have, I think, within the health system, it's really that of the first one is the leadership within the hospital services that we have. I think the second one, which I think is so obvious if you go to any hospital, is the infrastructure, the equipments that are in the hospital. And the third major one is really governance. The fourth one is human resources, which is translating to staff shortages. I think all of these things require a big plan that the Minister of Health, together maybe with the MECs in the provinces, should really ask themselves, we have inherited a country with a health system that was divided. We have now united it in the new constitution. What is our plan to ensure that it delivers the quality service that we expect and that we as doctors have been trained to do? What we are finding is really sad and sometimes horrifying, but what we expect in terms of the norms and standard, it's nothing extraordinary. It's what nurses are trained to do. It's the basics that doctors are trained to do, the physiotherapists. So we're not asking for something that is found in Mars or anything like that. These are heavenly things that we are trained to do every day as doctors, and that's what really we would want to wish that it happens throughout the health system. We all commit ourselves to quality, going back to basics, as I think Dr. Litlape says, and we do that which we have been taught to do, and we just repeat it and improve where we need to improve it. Those are the suggestions that I can have, but there needs to be a plan that everybody buys into and say, enough is enough. This is what we want to do from, I think, the past that we have inherited in order to build a new system that will provide the much lauded national health insurance or universal health care in the country.
Absolutely, definitely the inevitable next part of this conversation, upon the big plans that you speak of, on the back of inheriting a divided healthcare system, with the spotlight now on the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital, we have to look at the state of health in South Africa at large, and NHI is not looking like we're on track. So what is your assessment about the phased implementation as spoken about to date? When we look at the issues of service delivery, quality healthcare, are we deteriorating? Are we actually digressing instead of progressing? How would you assess that?
I spent a large part of my life not in South Africa, and my memory of what we were doing when we were young doctors, I think, was that, we were trying our best and we regarded our careers as almost like a calling. And that seems to have disappeared, I think, in the generation of young doctors that we have. I think we seem to have exchanged values for material things, and I think it has impacted, I think, on the health profession and the training of doctors as far as I can see. But as I say, I'm speaking here, I think, standing to be corrected by those that have been in the country all the time. But when you talk to patients, in terms of patient-doctor relationships, you often come with this finding that doctors are rude, they don't have time for us, and so forth and so forth. So there is a change in the attitude of the medical profession, if I may use that way. and also I think the nursing profession from the complaints that we receive, I think, in the Office of the Health Ombudsman. And I think we need to, and that needs to be directed from the top. I suppose it needs to be directed from the minister and his team of MECs in the provinces. They must sit and say, look, we are charged with the responsibility to deliver a quality health service that is universal in the country. And these are the things that we should, I think, prescribe at least as minimum to be done in every hospital or every health establishment, so that I think we can all, I think, work towards that goal and monitor how we are, trying to achieve that, rather than just, everybody is doing what they like, and I suppose, as they say, and God for us all. I think you can't work that way in a political system anyway.
Yep, absolutely. And with all the criticisms and concerns, we cannot run away from the strides that have been taken to date. And again, like one of the activists spoke about, the pockets of excellence that do exist in the country. And so, I'd like to explore that, but I'd also like to balance that by looking at NHI. And, whilst it looks like it is an appealing prospect to bring health equity to South Africans at large, there are obviously concerns from the private healthcare sector who believe it's unsustainable, unmanageable, just given the failures of public healthcare to date. There are also fears of healthcare professionals leaving, refusing to be subject to these schemes. The Treasury has also come out to say that there's no money. So one is to question where the funding is going to come for that as the rollout of the different phases come about. There's just so many issues. There's issues of a trust deficit, maladministration, mismanagement at large. How do you respond to those criticisms as, we look at how NHI, is going to be phased in, despite the High Court ruling declaring some parts of the Act unconstitutional?
Well, let me give you an example. I think as a country, we are richer than Cuba. You know a country called Cuba?
See, yes.
But Cuba has got one of the best health system in the world. Even better than...
All right, it seems like we're having some technical difficulties. A pity we couldn't get an answer on that. But we'll have to leave that conversation there, Professor Mkhwebane. Just weighing in on the back of the report released about the Rahima Moosa Mother and Child Hospital. The report obviously exposing the dire situation that has unfolded there. Him coming out to say that in its establishment 80 years ago, they say the hospital is worrisome. It's dirty, filthy, and unsafe. We're exploring how we got to that point. We're also looking at the recommendations put forth, but it opens up the conversation about the national health insurance at large and how we're faring at this point, what some of the concerns are, and really where to from here as a country. Again, it's such a pity that we couldn't continue that conversation, but we'll leave it there for now. We're going to take a quick ad break. The Watchdog continues upon our return. We'll be right back. Right, welcome back. The Watchdog continues. Student protests in South Africa have come to characterize the start of every academic calendar year since the first Fees Must Fall protests, which occurred back in 2015. So while universities, government and other stakeholders have attempted to ensure that steps are taken to ensure access to education for all, much still falls through the cracks. Perhaps in recent weeks, across the country, students took to the streets to demand that the NSFAS cap on student accommodation fee should be set aside and that some historical debt should be written off or concessions made. But I think to discuss this and more on issues plaguing the higher education sector, I'm joined by Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Buti Manamela. A very good evening. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a busy few weeks, a busy start to the academic calendar year. Again, no surprises since, if we look back since 2015. But perhaps we can just start with the latest. Last week you came out and announced, it was announced in Parliament that a working committee has been established to review the 45,000 Rand student allowance for accommodation at universities and colleges. How far are we with that process?
Well, the committee is meeting. It's a committee that comprises our department officials. It also comprises the leadership of the students. It also includes the NSFAS itself. And the intention basically is to look at the affected universities. So it also includes university vice-chancellors. So it's to basically look at the extent of the impact of the cap, where it is, and also to make proposals to the minister in terms of, what needs to be done, as it relates to the cap in terms of the universities that are affected. And it's predominantly universities that are in the urban areas. We introduced the cap because we realize that there's a potential collusion amongst especially private property accommodation providers. In some instances, accommodation rates shot up, to unthinkable levels. Students in Braamfontein, for instance, going to Wits and to UJ pay as much as 100,000. That means about 8,000 rand, 8 to 10,000 rands a month, because this is paid over sometimes a 10-month period. Yes, there are amenities in some of these institutions, in some of this accommodation, are state of the art and provides the services that students need, but also the proximity to campus. But I think it's quite unreasonable, because this is not free money. This is money that comes from the state through NSFAS allocation, firstly. Secondly, it's money that we now have since we introduced the cap, which we can then redistribute to fund more students to have access to higher education. But thirdly, we think, we cannot have private accommodation providers going on unchecked. And so, the NSFAS is obviously taking this matter up with the Competitions Commission, because we, really have to look at that. So we're trying to push, the market to adjust with the realities that students are finding themselves in. You cannot have a situation where in a student room, and some of these places, the testimonies from students are they're packed 3 or 4 of them in one room. So you can't have students paying that much amount as if they're staying in a 3-bedroom apartment, in Sandton. We think it's unreasonable. And I think also the same applies with some of the university accommodation. So the committee will basically look at all those issues and the impact that, those have. In the meantime, we are aware that there were some protests at Wits, at UCT,
and TUT.
At TUT, and I think it's important that we do not present this as turmoil in higher education. We have 26 universities, and now as we speak, all universities, there is learning and teaching that is taking place. In some areas, it's blended learning. So there's actually no turmoil. What was there was protests in these institutions. And I think I must commend the SRC leadership in these institutions, together with management, for the manner in which, of course, there were some incidents here and there where, there was, threat to people's rights to education, and, and I think anxiety around whether property will be destroyed or not. But I think the leadership of these universities, SRCs and everybody else, have basically come up, and moved beyond everything else that they may have to come and, intervene in this crisis. Some of the universities raise money to cover the deficit, together with their SRCs, so I think it's quite commendable. We really want to see, learning and teaching continuing at all of our universities. Of course, there was UKZN, and you know, yeah.
I actually wanted to ask if you could give us an update, perhaps, on what is transpiring on the process at WITS, at TUT, addressing some of the concerns, even UCT, perhaps those who, you know, were arrested, etc.
Yeah. As I mean, and as I said, so there are negotiations that are taking place between university managers and SRCs. You know, for instance, I've been in touch with the Vice Chancellor of the University of the Witwatersrand, together with the SRC President. You know, and we're hoping that, you know, of course, now there is what they call ceasefire. So we're hoping that, you know, within time they would have resolved whatever issues that needs to be resolved. But I also want to take this opportunity, I think, to call on the student leadership. You know, the right to protest in our country is an important right. You know, and I think we shouldn't stretch the limit of that right by, you know, having all these images across, you know, on our media where destruction of property takes place, or, you know, anything of the sort. I think let's respect, you know, everybody else's right when we, you know, demonstrate in these campuses.
Thank you for that. Context is important.
Yeah.
I think as we move away from those updates now, you want us to just look at the bigger picture to date. And I wonder, as we look at the NDP plan targeting increasing university and TVET college enrollment.
Yes.
How are we faring on that front? I mean, we have to look at factors of infrastructure. Was that factored in? We have to look at issues of accommodation. We also have to look at whether it's sustainable at this point. Walk us through what's been discussed on that front.
Look, I mean, we're doing quite well with the increase in terms of the number of students that go to universities. I mean, this year we may actually hit the 1.2 million mark when we get the numbers. And I think the NDP target is somewhere in the region of 1.65 million by 2030. We're not doing very well as it relates to TVET college registration, and there are a whole range of factors. We are projections for this year is 550,000. When the minister was addressing Parliament a couple of days ago on the state of readiness, he indicated that this will be, you know, the ministry's priority to look at ways within which we can meet, or at least make a huge dent on the objective of 2.5 million students by 2030. It was a very ambitious objective. I mean, at the time when the target was set, the number of students at TVET colleges was just above 200,000, you know, which was in 2014. So we've drastically moved those numbers up to now 550,000. Partly because we privileged in South Africa university education. Everybody, when they complete their grade 12, they want to go to university. In fact, parents would almost strangle you if you suggest to them that their kids should consider going to a TVET college. Secondly, you know, we're doing a lot of outreach to try and expose, you know, grade 10, 11, and 12 students to a TVET education, because one can go into a TVET college once they complete their grade 10. Thirdly, so exposure is important. Government has invested quite a lot over the last, you know, 15 to 20 years compared to any other period in the TVET college sector. 90% of students who go there are funded by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. We've seen, you know, investments, for instance, partnerships with the government of India, with the Center of Specialization that we have at Watchdog I South TVET College, but in many others. So these are, so the centers of specialization are all over the country. And so all of these investments are meant to drive, you know, the participation rate. Yes, there are going to be challenges around infrastructure, you know, and you know, one of the major passion in the ministry is to get to work with public works, to look at available infrastructure that can actually be used not only for student accommodation, but also to help in the expansion, in particular, of the TVET sector. One of the other things which, you know, there is actually a ministerial committee that will advise the minister on this is, you know, the online learning. So open up, you know, that space. I think with availability of technology, of course, there are challenges. But that's what we're the kind of work that we're doing to grow the TVET sector, to improve the quality of education at TVET colleges, but also to expand in terms of quantity. So I really want to urge those who are doing grade 10, 11, and 12, and parents of kids who are doing that, to look at, a TVET college in your neighborhood, look at what they're doing, what programs they're offering. Chances of a TVET college graduate being employed are much higher than in any other sector in our education system.
With that said, when we look at the funding model rather of higher institutions of learning, perhaps also NSFAS, is it working to date? And when we look at exerting authority when it comes to NSFAS implementing the cap on the allowances, perhaps also the autonomy of institutions, how would you comment on that when people begin to question what's emerged to date?
Yeah, so a couple of, firstly, NSFAS has had its own challenges, and I think if we look at when government introduced fee-free higher education back in 2018, from that point onward, the number of protests has significantly declined. We've had students complaining that they're not getting their allowances on time. I mean, on Twitter, almost on a daily basis, I get to respond to those kind of questions, those I can reach, and refer them to NSFAS. And sometimes we've had, issues around accommodation and all of those. But in general, I mean, I joined the ministry in 2018. And since then, I think the number of protests firstly have gone down. The number of complaints around NSFAS being able to facilitate payments to students have also gone down. They've introduced, beautiful technology, and I had a discussion with both the chair and the CEO, and I said we need to talk to students and, let's hear their real experience about NSFAS and see how that can help us to improve. And we've also, had discussions with them around improving communications. So yes, there are challenges, and I mean, if you're talking about an institution that deals with 1.2 million students across, the country, that there are bound to be, those kind of challenges. But I think the plan is to make sure that as we move on, we try and minimize all of these challenges. Yes, universities have got their autonomy. It's protected by law. But we always say, a significant contribution to universities. Of course, there still needs to be more money that goes to universities, but a significant contribution to universities comes from government. And government has a set of identified priorities. Universities, irrespective of their role, still has the obligation to help the country to contribute towards the skills needs of this country. Sure. So, people can shout autonomy, but we need doctors, we need engineers, we need, in terms of TVET colleges, we need artisans qualified in different areas.
It's the future labor force of the country.
Exactly. Yeah. So we cannot have a situation where in universities use their autonomy, for instance, to offer programs that are not going to help, firstly, build the country, but also improve the chances of employability, of students who go into those institutions. And that's why on an annual basis, through the, 100 priority skills list, and as part of the collaboration between our department and each of the universities in terms of planning, we identify what should be the output in terms of priority skills.
I mean, there's obviously too much to mention, but what are some of those priority skills for those who are watching, perhaps also making those decisions? In the same breath, when we look at the role of private institutions, is there going to be policy amendments perhaps to make sure that more students can enroll, given that public institutions are not really coping at this point, or perhaps there needs to be a merge of sorts?
Look, I mean, we almost all the time are focused on exposing bogus private colleges. Yes. It's one of the campaigns that I've taken to heart, because the kind of money that families lose, after having gone to attend to, some of these bogus colleges. Exactly, and time, and and whatever other resources. And so we really want to call on anybody. If you see a college, if you suspect that it may not be registered, so all colleges that are private colleges should be able to show you the certificate of registration, and secondly, proof that they are allowed to be offering the programs which they say they are allowing from the department, from Umalusi, and from various qualifications authorities. So ask for those, and if you cannot be provided with those, and check if those qualifications have, those certificates or permission have not expired. So you know what some of the colleges do, private colleges. So they register the institution,
yes, and
then they register one program with the department, and yet they provide 6 other programs which they are not supposed to be providing. So specifically for that kind of program that you are registered, and we'll give you the details which we can give to viewers to complain, but also visit our website, or alert anybody from the department, or even the police and all of that. The biggest challenge is that we're not a law enforcement agency. We're a Department of Higher Education and Training. Sometimes we get to confront the private education providers. They get to spend a night only in jail, and then they come back and then they continue running. But we will not tire. We will fight bogus colleges.
And so when we look at the issue of enrollment and policy amendments that come to private institutions, how are you going to address that? What concerns have also come about it as a result?
Yeah. Look, and maybe let me not only focus on bogus.
On bogus, exactly.
I mean, I've been to colleges that are fully registered, private colleges that are fully registered. They're playing a very important role.
Yeah.
So we have, the capacity of the public post-school education and training sector, as we speak, is just close to 2 million. So it's 1.2 million students at universities, about 550,000 students at TVET colleges, and 200,000 odd, I think, at community colleges. And so private colleges provide an important space if they are legal, if they're properly registered, and we encourage them to do that, because the state alone cannot be able to provide, education. I wouldn't mention them by name, but I think there are fully compliant private universities, private colleges that are out there, that are equally providing quality higher education, and we really want to commend those. And we want some of them actually come and tell us that there's a college in our neighborhood. Of course, it's competition, but they're not legal. And maybe through that kind of collaboration, we will be able to protect the public from being vulnerable to those who are not fully compliant.
You mentioned quite a few issues a little earlier on. Themes rather. I want to go back a little bit. You spoke about, the modus, the way of learning, perhaps also post-COVID. I mean, it's a hybrid situation that's obviously come to the fore, and we can't ignore the issues of the digital divide that's also come as a result. How are we going to also address that, given those who obviously don't have access to resources or want us to reallocate in terms of budget, etc.? How are you accommodating for that?
Look, firstly, the future of expanding our post-school education and training system lies in blended learning, which is a combination of physical and online, and potentially more also towards online learning. The biggest university in the continent, in one of the top performing universities, which has now improved about 5 spots, the University of South Africa, is a distance learning institution. Yes, there are some challenges, but it provides education to more than 400,000 students, both in South Africa and also in the continent and even abroad. So, so it tells you, and most of the other universities, the component of online students and the availability of online courses is actually on the rise. And so. Yes, we'll have to improve in terms of infrastructure around, data. One of the things that you know, I mean, the minister always talks about is the you know, freeing the spectrum that would specifically focus on education. We think that would help to make it cheaper, to make it more qualitative. I mean, this was the same issue that, you know, students at Wits, but also students at the University of Venda and everywhere else have been complaining about. Yes, we've got the gadgets, but we'll have to have access to...
Exactly.
So you know, there are certain initiatives within the department, but also, you know, certain initiatives that are led by, you know, the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies to ensure that we have as wide access to, you know, internet and all of that in our country, so that it can be used specifically for education.
Yeah, given also with the trajectory of the world, the fourth industrial revolution. It's an interactive show. We obviously have viewers watching at the Watchdog SABC. There's some questions coming through. As you can see, I'm trying to manage this. Mkhwebane, in fact, interacting with us at the Watchdog SABC, watching and commenting, saying that talk is cheap. Public representatives must start to come with evidence when coming to give facts. They always insist to have done because of on the ground, it contradicts their speeches. Why do we have protests every year with basically your smart speaking? How would you respond to that?
Look, and like I said when I started, the protests this year were on completely, you know, different issues. And it's issues that we're dealing with, the question of allowances and the question of accommodation. And we think that, you know, there is relative stability within the sector now as we, you know, as we speak.
All right, well, thank you, Mkhwebane. Perhaps that was a satisfactory answer. Thank you very much for that. Speaking of the issue of accommodation, I was actually also reading about the challenges around SHIP, the Student Housing Infrastructure Program, which it's in phase 1 and 2.
Yep.
If I can just read some of the stats coming out: 9,721 beds completed, 27,989 still in the planning phase. A lot of people questioning the slow pace of that rollout. How would you respond to that, given perhaps funding challenges, given perhaps the target of 300,000 by 2030?
Yep.
Yeah.
Look, it's about money. I think what the Student Housing Infrastructure Program has shown, that you know, coordination between you know, a client department, which in this case is our department, together with the Development Bank of South Africa and Treasury, that if there's such coordination, you can actually maximize delivery. You know, over the last 2 to 3 years, there have been so many accommodation points that have been popping up throughout the country through that project. But you obviously need more money allocated to you know, to all of this, you know, and I mean, we always go to Treasury and say this is what needs to be done.
Yeah.
But I also think in the same vein, I mean, the NSFAS led some discussions in terms of how, you know, given that they are one of the major contributors in terms of student accommodation, you know, as to finding innovative ways within which we can accelerate delivery of, you know, student housing. There's no country in the world that fully houses their students. And so, yes, we've come up with the ideal number, which is the shortage of beds, which are up to 300,000, you know, and that we're going to do all that we can to ensure that students live in safe accommodation where they're able to, you know, to study and to pass and all of that. But, you know, as is now, it's a project that needs huge amounts of money, you know, for us to be able to meet. Hopefully, in some way, we'll have to look at innovative ways within which we can deliver this student accommodation.
Let's reimagine. Let's look at what the long term, what the vision is. You obviously came in with a purpose to the department. And there's so many issues, actually. It was so tricky to even hone in on what I really wanted to speak about. So the issue of resources, enrollment, accommodation, perhaps has come to the fore this time around. But as we reimagine what transformation is going to look like for South Africa, given where we are and where we'd like to be, what does that look like for you as the department? I mean, there's issues of decolonization of the curriculum. There's issue of implementing learning in languages. There's so much.
So much, of course,
Give us that grand plan. and vision? Perhaps we can hold you accountable the next time we chat.
Look, I mean, the country's post-school education and training plan is contained firstly in the National Development Plan, and it sets certain targets, and those targets, I think we've spoken about some of them earlier, about the enrollment targets. But also transformation means that, and we're relatively almost there, the number of black women who are going to our universities and TVET colleges, and I think that has drastically increased. So young women actually dominate the post-school education and training sector, and not only in terms of participation, but also in terms of graduation. Secondly, an improvement in terms of the number of black women, as academics. So we have the new generation NGAP program, which is in collaboration with the United States, with some of the United States universities, whose intention is to churn out masters and doctoral and postdoctoral graduates, academics who will continue working within the system, which has been one of the major challenges. So I think that's the second thing. But thirdly, I think that we have privileged university education so much in South Africa that we will have to, if we are going to succeed in our ideal of industrialization, we're going to need a certain set of skills. And those set of skills will not come from universities. They will come from TVET colleges. We need artisans in engineering, in electricity, in motor mechanics, plumbers, and all of that. And I think the cherry on top is that most students who get to be trained, for instance, as plumbers, or they graduate as artisans, are most likely going to be getting a job or to be starting their own business. I was reading the other day that some of the plumbers actually earn more than deputy ministers. So we really need to be encouraging that. So the focus, I think, will have to be on changing the quality of our TVET colleges and increasing the number of students who participate there. Yeah,
inclusivity, equity, equality, representation.
Yep.
A lot that needs to be realized there. Perhaps also creating safer spaces. I mean, you also address the issue of GBV, minorities, LGBTQI+, etc. Again, too much to chat about in these few minutes, but thank you for your time, Deputy High Minister of Higher Education, Buti Manamela. Speaking about the state of higher education, just on the back of the protests that have occurred, and some universities, perhaps also the way forward, both short-term and long-term. Again, thank you to him for his time here on the SABC. Perhaps moving to another story that has made headlines today, in fact, on the back of what transpired yesterday. Suspended Public Protector, Advocate Mkhwebane, has pleaded with the Section 194 inquiry probing her fitness to hold office to understand that she is not immune from making mistakes. She has also pointed out that even judges make mistakes and their judgments are overturned, but they are not taken through impeachment proceedings. This comes obviously as in the case with her. So Mkhwebane has now been testifying for the second day at the inquiry. Let's take a listen in to what transpired today. We'll also leave it there for now from myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the team. Until next time, it's good night.
Mkhwebane faces charges of misconduct and incompetence. She's accused of allegedly targeting certain people in her investigations, such as President Cyril Ramaphosa. Mkhwebane has testified on her investigation into the CR17 Busasa complaint against Ramaphosa. She denied she targeted certain people for nefarious purposes during her investigations.
We are doing this, as I said, for the members of the public to understand what I received, and especially the fact that I'm targeting individuals. And I indicated to you that somebody was even asking me, are you fighting the president? So that people can know that within my responsibilities, this is what complaint we've received. This is where the facts.
Mkhwebane had found that Ramaphosa had deliberately misled Parliament about the Busasa donation to his CR17 campaign. but a report was set aside by the Constitutional Court in a majority judgment. Mkhwebane's counsel, Advocate Dalimpofu, has, however, painstakingly used the majority judgment to support Mkhwebane's findings.
The Chief Justice sometimes used even stronger language than the public protector in disagreeing with the president.
Yes.
Okay. 188.
And it bears repetition that that false version is that there was a deliberate plan to ensure that the president does not get to know who the donors were, how much they donated, and how the financial assistance received for his campaign was being used. The emails squarely belied this assertion. The question that we should then be asking ourselves is, why did the president and his team deliberately convey a falsehood on an issue so crucial and inextricably connected to the constitutional imperative to promote and observe high ethical standards in obedience to the demands of our democratic state's founding values, which is openness and accountability? He must have known that if the truth evidenced by the emails were to be told, the obligation to disclose the names of the funders and the size of their contributions to the National Assembly, and by extension to the public, would automatically and plainly be triggered.
Mkhwebane maintains that she's being persecuted because she's probing the untouchables.
There were several judgments ourselves as an office which we had to go through, where higher courts were criticizing the lower courts' judges. And there was no stage where those lower courts were then exposed or subjected to this particular process which I'm subjected to.
Which process is that?
The process of coming here and be told that I'm incompetent.
Mkhwebane has also cherry-picked from the majority judgment.
And even the majority judgment, they also agreed that they are fallible as judges.
The inquiry continues. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament.